He knew better than to fool with her when she had the advantage. We stopped at the wreck a minute so he could fish out a box of cigars. I bet it blistered him a little to have her drive him up the hill he'd just slid down. Molly was still living on the old Taylor place where she had lived her whole life. It was on a hill, some say the highest place in the county, and you could see it for miles and miles around. First time I ever saw Molly was on that place. She was carrying a jug of the old man's whiskey up the cellar steps. It was the first time I had ever been visiting anywhere. All my folks were blondes, and I never will forget how surprised I was to see them black-headed Taylor kids. Pa and the old man sat on the back steps and drank whiskey out of the same jug for half an hour, and then they chased me and Molly down and made us drink a little. We cried and run off down to the pig pen together and made some mud pies out of the pig wallah and ate them to get the whiskey taste out of our mouths. When we went back, the old man thought of some more devilment. He sat a bucket on the fence and said he'd give me a dime if I'd shoot it off with his old 12-gauge shotgun. I didn't know what a dime was, but I was crazy about guns. Pa steadied it for me, so I don't guess I caught the whole kick, but I caught enough. I missed the bucket, too, so the old man wouldn't give me the dime. I never found out what one was till 2 years later. Molly took up for me and led me down in the cellar and showed me the still. And she stayed right there and done all of her living right up on that hill. I guess she just never saw no reason to move around. Her old man and old lady were dead before she married Eddie, and all the other kids had left home. Eddie never had nothing but a pack of turd hounds and a pair of roughnecking boots from the day he was born till the day he fell off the derrick. Their getting married was just a matter of finding a justice of the peace who was sober enough to talk. But it's still strange to think of her spending her whole life there on her hill. One night when we were younger and we were laying up together, I was awake listening to the wind rattle the window panes, and I asked her about it. "Ain't you curious to see the world at all?" I said. "No," she said, "I'm just doing as much living right here and now as I could anywhere." And she hugged me and we went back to sleep. Probably, in the long run, she was right. She done her share up on that hill. She was born there and went to school what little she went over in the Idiot Ridge schoolhouse. The flu killed the old lady in 1918. The old man drank lye. Her oldest brother, Shep, I don't know what became of him. Mary Margaret married a store clerk, and Rich got caught stealing saddles and sent to the pen. Molly said once he was out, but he never came our way. Eddie fell off that oil rig, and then the Germans got Joe, and the Japs got Jimmy. All that time, Molly stayed there and went on. Sometimes I wonder what will become of the old Taylor place when Molly and the rest of us are gone. I can't imagine that hill without her. But I guess there ain't nothing that don't come to an end sometime. When we got there, she took us in the kitchen and fed us peach cobbler and coffee. Gid was quiet as a mouse. After a while, she went out in the smokehouse and brought in some kerosene for him to soak his arm in. He perked right up. "Oh, is that all?" he said. He couldn't get his sleeve up fast enough. I guess he thought she went after the dehorning saw. "Yeah, if she gets too rough," I said. "I got to go outside. Smelling that kerosene ain't good for a healthy man." I went out back and sat on the steps. You could see way off west, across Molly's land and a lot of Gid's. Her back bedroom was a nice place to wake up. The clouds to the west were peeling away like layers of gauze, and it wasn't long before the sun was shining on the wet mesquite. I could hear her and Gid talking through the screen door. It was childish, but it made me feel left out. I knew all about it. Old as they was, Gid was still halfway talking about leaving Mabel and coming to live with Molly, and she was halfway encouraging it. And it would have been a good thing for Gid and her both, I guess. It just made me feel a little left out. We had both hung around her so long. Of course, Gid ought to left Mabel. Living with her 30 years was no judgment in my book. But she had a grandkid to hold over him. I got up and walked around to the garden to see how the tomatoes and the roasting ears were holding out. I seen I was going to have to make it around for supper a little more often if I was going to beat the blister bugs to what there was. Molly kind of expected me for supper anyway, a lot of times. When I came out of the garden, the sun was so bright that I went around to the front of the house where the shade was. In a little while, Gid come out on the porch. He had about half a bed sheet wrapped around his arm, and he was grinning like a possum. "I'm as good as new," he said. Molly came out with 3 big glasses of buttermilk and a plate of cold cornbread. Nobody had much to say, so we sat quiet for a change, eating cornbread and buttermilk. Once in a while, the conversation would kind of settle. I guess we were all thinking about old times. Finally, I looked around, and Molly and Gid were staring off across the pastures, not seeing anything. "What time is it?" I said. They both jumped. Gid fished out his pocket watch, but it was stopped. "Shadows are pretty long," Molly said. "Time we got on," he said. "Oh, you all stay for supper. I've got some fresh black-eyed peas shelled. We'll dress a fryer." "I guess we can't," Gid said, sounding a little gloomy. He set his empty buttermilk glass down on the tray. His nose still looked raw and stingy. Molly walked out in the yard and began to pick on the lilac bushes. "I don't see why you all don't just sit a few more minutes," she said. "Supper won't take no time." "We'll have to put it off till some other time," Gid said. "We're much obliged." "I don't want you much obliged," she said, kind of snappy. "I want you to eat with me." Then we walked around the house and stood by the cellar a minute, the cellar old man Taylor had built. The sun was down, and it was clouding up again over in the northwest. Gid said, "Let's go," and Molly tried one more time to get us to stay. She walked out to the pickup with us, looking down in the dumps. Gid bragged on her bandage a little to try and perk her up. "You all come by and see me," she said. "I'll be by," I said. "I might even get back tonight. I wish you would, if it ain't out of your way. I'll keep something on the stove." "No, don't go to no trouble," I said. "No sense in you waiting up special. I might not get by till 11 o'clock, I don't know." "Okay," she said. "Do as you please." We told her goodbye, and I drove on out through the cattle guard into the lane. Molly was still standing by her windmill, watching the world. Or maybe just watching us. "She's getting lonesome in her old age," he said. "Tell me where to go," I said. "I don't want to get blamed for taking you someplace wrong." He never had found out I wasn't no mind reader. Once when we was younger and got drunk, I took him to a rodeo in Newcastle, and it turned out he had paid his entry fee and won in Waruka, Oklahoma, 150 miles the other way. "Just take me home," he said. He was blue. He always got blue in the late evenings, had been for years. If I had to face Mabel, I wouldn't have had no fondness for sundown either. "Molly's been lonesome a good while," I said. "Her independent talk don't fool me." "We're the only ones that ever go and see her," he said. "Wonder why she don't like women folk." "Same reason I don't. They're silly as hens, all of them except her." He turned it over in his mind for a while. It wasn't quite dark good, but all the lights were on in Thalia. Every time we topped a hill, I seen them flashing. The shower had cooled things off, and the country smelled nice and green. Being in Rex made Gid thoughtful. "Molly's had a lot," he said. "Yes," I said, "but I wouldn't call it no whopping success of a life." "She's made mistakes," he said. "So have I, and so have you." "At least I ain't made the same ones over and over again," I said. "Why not? You might as well make them you're used to as to make new ones all the time. It don't do no more damage." Anyhow, he said, "I wish she wasn't lonesome." We drove through Thalia. 2 or 3 cars were parked in front of the picture show, and a couple more outside the Domino Hall. "Television's got the picture show business," he said. "No wonder. They quit making good shows. The last one I seen that was any count was Red River." "Good night," he said. "That was years ago." "So were a lot of good things," I said. 6 or 8 kids were scuffling and fighting on the courthouse lawn under the mulberry trees. "You don't keep up," he said. "Cheyenne was made since then. So was The Searchers." "Them was so-so," I said. "All the good movie stars are getting too old." "I wish I had the energy them kids have," he said. "You'd waste it," I said, "just like they're doing." We passed the drive-in eating place, and it looked like 90% of the cars in town were there. "Them things are what makes the money," I said. "I know it," he said. "I hate a drive-in. Them jukeboxes are awful." "Susie'll be right there in a few years," I said, "right in the middle of it." "I guess so," he said. "I reckon so." I pulled up in his driveway and stopped. Gid opened the door, but he kept sitting there. "How'll we get those goddamn goats?" he said. "I favor a 30-30, I said. "The ammunition's cheap." "But the goats ain't. We'll just get out there about daybreak and get them ourselves." "I knew you'd decide on the hardest way." "If you stop at the Domino Hall," he said, "tell Charlie Starton to get his wrecker and go get that car. You might show him where it is." What he meant was, be damn sure I didn't let that car sit out there all night. "Okay," I said, "see you when it gets light. Any special horse? You got one that's good on goats?" "Bring me any one you can catch," he said. He was out, still holding to the car door. I began to back up. The only way to get loose from him was to drive loose. When I swung into the street, my headlights shone on him, standing outside his door cleaning his boots. Charlie Starton was standing on the sidewalk in front of the Domino Hall, smoking a cigar. "What's the matter with Gid?" he said. "Can't he drive?" I never cared to stand around having no conversation with Charlie Starton. "His reflexes don't work too fast," I said. "Are you coming or ain't you?" When there was money involved, Charlie's reflexes worked awful fast. He followed me right out and winced up the car. I turned in at Molly's, but it was past 10, and she had gone to bed. I hated that. I hated to see Molly lonesome, and I'd been counting on some cold supper besides, but it wasn't no go. I went home and fed the chickens and ate me a bowl of Post Toasties and went to bed. Chapter 3. About 2 weeks later, we met Molly at the feed store one morning. It was August then, and the country was drying up, so Gid wanted to feed his old cows a little. I was in town early, and we thought we'd be the first customers, but Molly's old Ford was sitting by the loading platform. "She's getting her chicken feed," I said. Gid looked a little nervous. Him and her might have been having arguments, I don't know. Her and the feed store hands were sitting in the back of the store on the sacks of dog food, drinking coffee. Samuel Houston was petting his old mangy dog and telling a big windy. He didn't own the feed store, he just foremaned it. His boy T.I. and a crew of Mexicans did what little work got done. Molly looked up and said hello to us, but Samuel H. never broke his stride. "He caught me about 2 miles this side of the stop sign," he said. "Come walking up to the car with a big gun on his hip and a badge on his chest. 'I'd like to see your driver's license,' he said, like it was a friendly conversation. 'I'd like to see your funeral notice, you son of a bitch,' I said. 'Now, mister, don't use that foul language,' he said. 'What are you going to tell the judge when you have to show him this ticket?' 'I guess by God I'll tell him I run a goddamn stop sign,' I said. 'Now give it here. I got to get this feed unloaded this morning.' Why, I'd have stomped that mother into the pavement," T.I. said, "where he needed to be stomped." He might have, too. Once at a medicine show, T.I. won what they said was a genuine white Mormon wife, only it turned out to be a genuine white rock hen. He stomped a little that night. His real name was Texas Independence. "Why, hello, Gid," Samuel Houston said. "Have you seen my dog? This here's the smartest dog I ever raised, and I call him Billy Saul. He can suck the eggs right out from under the hens without them ever noticing." Gid just looked impatient. "I hate to bother you fellers," he said, "but if it ain't too much trouble, I'd like about a dozen sacks of cottonseed cake." The 3 Mexicans got the biggest laugh out of that. They led such easy lives, sitting around that percolator, I guess they could get a big laugh out of anything. "Oh, it's no trouble," Samuel H. said. "No trouble at all. That's what we're in business for. Sit down and help yourself to some coffee." "No, thank you," Gid said. "I believe we'll get the cake and get on. The longer we wait, the hotter it'll get." "Then by God, why go? A man can get too hot out working if he ain't careful. It'll be cool again this afternoon." "Oh, sit down a minute," Molly said. "I got a favor to ask you." But Gid was having a stubborn fit. He kept standing up fidgeting. Finally, I got tired of standing and sat down. "We'd sure like to get on," Gid said. "Maybe me and Johnny could just load the feed ourselves if you'd show us where it is." "Why, sure, Gid," Samuel Houston said. "It's right over there in the corner. Just feel right at home. Show him where that cottonseed cake is, T.I. T.I. yawned like he had just got up. "Sure," he said. "Why don't you let these boys help you pitch it in the truck? They don't mind." I knew it would eventually come down to me helping load it. Gid would have soon handled a rattlesnake as a sack of cattle feed. He never lifted one except in emergencies. But as soon as I stood up and moved, the Mexicans grabbed the sacks and had the feed loaded in a minute and a half. And as soon as Gid saw that, he was perfectly happy to stay a while. He felt like things were getting done. Only he said the exact wrong thing, and Molly thought he said it to her. "That's the stuff," he said. "We can get going in a minute now and get some work done. I wasn't raised lazy like most people." I don't know what possessed him to say it. Maybe it was being nervous. And I don't know what possessed Molly to take it wrong. He never meant to aim it at her. But she sat her cup down and gave him the strangest hurt look. The elevator boss drove up then, and Samuel and T.I. and the Mexicans jumped to get to work. Just us three stayed there, and it was real quiet. I tried my hardest to think of some conversation to kind of pass it all over, and I know Gid did too, but we couldn't come up with much. It was plain silly, but it was awkward as hell. 5 minutes of it would have made me sick, but I never lasted over 2. Molly broke down crying. I knew she would. "That wasn't a very nice thing to say to me, Gid," she said. She bent over with her head between her knees, and we could only see her hair and her head shaking. Then all of a sudden she straightened up and looked right at me. "Well, aren't you going to take up for me?" she said, and went to crying again. Well, I didn't know what to say. None of it made sense. I guess she took it as something against her dad. She always tried to fool herself about him. Gid never could appreciate how hard some people worked to fool themselves. She cried hard when she cried, but it didn't last too long. Gid was just flabbergasted. In a minute, her back got still, and she looked up. The tears were dripping everywhere, but she was kind of calm again, and nobody would have believed she had been so upset. I went over and filled her coffee cup and handed it to her. "Thank you," she said. She rested her elbows on her knees and bent over, sipping coffee, with the tears running off the corner of her mouth and dripping right into the cup. Gid couldn't stand it. He got up and fished out his handkerchief. "Here, don't ruin that good coffee," he said. She took it and kind of grinned at him. "What am I going to do with myself?" she said. "Why, I'm terribly sorry, Molly," he said. "I never meant a thing by that remark." "Oh, I know you didn't," she said. "It's silly. I don't know why some things upset me so. You ain't to blame." But he was, really. At least he sure thought he was. We sat for about 5 minutes, all of us a little bit worried, drinking our coffee. "I thought of something while I was crying," Molly said. "I hadn't thought of it in years. It was when all of us kids were at home, when we still used blackstrap molasses for all our sweetening. Daddy went into Thalia and bought the winter groceries one day." She stopped and looked out the feed store door at the hot, dusty street and the houses of Thalia on the other side of it, with television aerials sticking up on their roofs like I don't know what. She looked like she was looking through a telescope at something as far away as the moon, and I guess they was about that far away them days. It takes a long memory to sit on a bunch of dog feed sacks and call up old man Cletus Taylor riding off to Thalia in a wagon. I bet he had a whiskey jug on the seat beside him, too. When he come back, just before sundown, she said, he had a big barrel of sorghum molasses sitting in the front of the wagon. Him and Shep went to unloading the flour and stuff, and the rest of us kids stood there looking at that syrup barrel. I couldn't hardly imagine that much syrup. It was the sweets for the whole winter. Pretty soon Dad and Shep come back and walked the barrel to the back of the wagon so they could lift it down. Her talking quavered a little. "I never did know how it happened," she said. "But anyway, when they were lifting it out of the wagon, one of them lost his grip and it fell and busted open on the ground. The molasses stood by itself just a second, and then it all spread out and began to run down the hill toward the chicken house. We all just stood there. We couldn't move for a minute. The first was when Richard stuck his toe in it. It ran real slow, and ants and doodle bugs got caught in it. There wasn't no way to scoop it up. Then we all began to cry. Mary Margaret took it the worst. She held her breath and ran all the way around the house before anybody could catch her to pound her on the back. Then she went over and began to bang her head on the cellar door. She was the worst to hold her breath and bang her head I ever saw. Even Shep was crying. Richard was the only one that showed good sense. He squatted down and stuck his finger in it and kept licking it up that way till after dark. I couldn't believe it. Nothing had hurt me that bad before. After a while, Richard put a horned toad in it, and it got stuck. I went in the house and got in one of the wood boxes and wouldn't come out till after supper. Shep and Daddy argued over whose fault it was till Shep just finally left home, and Daddy stayed down in the cellar drinking whiskey nearly that whole winter. My God, Gid said, that was a tragedy. Nothing will ever make me forget watching that sorghum run downhill, she said. What was that favor you wanted to ask? Gid said. Oh, old Roni got out in the big pasture the other day, she said. I can't get her back. Roni was her milk cow. She was a wild old bitch. We'll come right on and get her, he said, standing up. Molly put up her coffee cup and got in her car, and we got in the pickup. You drive, he said. Don't worry, I said. This pickup is the only means of transportation I have. I ain't anxious to let you under the wheel. I wish we didn't have to get that cow in, he said. We just barely will have time to do the feeding. I'm glad to do it today, I said. Another day or two, and you'll be gone to have your operation, and I'll have to do it by myself. Molly needs to be married, he said. She ain't able to run that place by herself. I never meant to get her so upset this morning. She's too touchy sometimes, I said. I had heard that molasses story before, he said. That was awful. I can imagine just how them kids felt. When we got to Molly's house, she was just going in the back door, had her mind on dinner. I went on down to the barn. Gid was out before I got stopped. Let's pin the old hussy and eat dinner and go, he said. Which one you want, Chester or Matt? Molly named her horses after Gunsmoke. Chester, I guess, I said. God damn, he said, trying to saddle up. This old bastard's so big around, it's like trying to saddle a whiskey keg. He didn't get no sympathy from me. I had reared back to throw my saddle on and heaved, and Chester had got one of his big front feet on the girt. It like to broke my back. I dropped the saddle, too. Well, I've shot my wad, I said. I never will get up strength for another throw. Gid got a big laugh out of it. And at that, the horses was easier than the cow. She was standing right in plain sight down by the salt lick. The sight cheered Gid up. Well, looky there, he said. This won't take no time. I was afraid the old bitch would be off in the mesquite somewhere. She may be yet, I said. I can remember cattle closer to the gate than she is that ended up getting away. How about Mick and Big Shitty? They were two old outlaw steers Gid had owned for about 10 years. We chased them up and down Onion Creek all one summer, and finally tricked them into the lot with some hay. We kept Mick, too. But Gid got careless, and Big Shitty ran over him in a water trough and tore up 3 fences and got plumb away. Oh, she's just an old milk cow, he said. You sickle around behind her that-a-way. I did. Old Chester loped about as graceful as a road grader. At first, old Roni came along fine. Actually, I just don't think she had noticed us. I think she just thought it was Chester and Matt by themselves. Molly just sooked her a foot. She might not have never seen men on horses before. But when she figured things out, the race was on. She had her head down and her bag swinging from side to side, and she was covering country. I was closest, and I whipped up. I knew if I let her get in the brush, it would be my fault from the conception to the resurrection. Chester had no idea what it was all about, but he done his best. We barely got her turned before she hit the brush. Then she struck out south just as fast, and Gid and Matt struck out to head her again. It was the funniest sight I ever seen. Old Matt didn't no more care about that cow than if she was the moon, and when it come time to stop and turn her, he just went right on into the brush. The brush went popping, and the cuss words come a-flying back. But I took in after Roni. I didn't have no time to worry about Gid. Actually, she turned out to have about twice as much speed as Chester, and I was just hoping she'd stop for the south fence when I seen Gid and Matt come flying out of the brush ahead of me, hot on her trail. Them thorny thickets hadn't helped Gid's disposition, I knew that. He didn't have his hat anymore, or all his shirt. But he had his rope down. Nobody in their right mind would try to rope off a plow horse, but Gid would rope an elephant off a Shetland if he took a notion. He was swapping old Matt with the rope about every 2 steps, and Matt was going to the races. Gid came roaring over a little knoll, swinging his rope and yelling, and pretty soon he let fly and caught him a cow. It was where his troubles began. Any horse with a grain of brains would have stopped when Gid threw the rope. Matt wasn't in that category. Gid reared back on the reins. He seen his fix immediately. But Matt went right on. I guess he seen the old cow when he run by her, but he sure never dreamed him and her were connected. She was just landscape to him. Roni got a big surprise. One minute she was headed for the high and lonesome, and the next minute Matt had got the end of the rope, and she was tearing up the land like a plow. Gid, he was just a spectator, but his sympathies were all with the cow. Finally, Matt figured out he was dragging an anchor. When I rode up, all three of them were panting. "She's caught now," I said. One of her horns was broke, and her front leg stuck out sideways, about as useful as a dish rag. "Why can't nothing go right?" he said. Not, "Why can't I do nothing right?" And if I had done it, it would have been, "What in the goddamn hell did you mean pulling a stunt like that?" "One consolation," I said, "we won't never have to get her up again." But Gid was too blue to rag. "Nobody's fault," I said. "No, but I'll get blamed," he said, "and I'll furnish the new cow." "Oh, no," I said, "Molly wouldn't want you to do that. We were just being neighbors. Accidents happen sometimes." "Mostly to me," he said. "Let's go. She'll stay till we get back." "She won't be hard to track if she don't," I said. "Where did you lose your hat?" His hand flew up to his head, and he turned a shade bluer. He hadn't missed it till then. Me and Chester sat on the hill and waited while he went and found it. Of course, Molly was as nice as she could be about it. If it fazed her at all, it didn't show. She had meat and beans and gravy on the table when we got there, and some roasting ears steaming in the big bowl. Sweat was dripping off the iced tea glasses. "I hate to lose her," she said, but she was wild as a wolf anyway. I had to hobble her all the time. She wouldn't hear of Gid furnishing her another cow, and she wouldn't even let us go down and kill the old hussy for her. Gid was out of the talking mood, so we ate and loaded our saddles and left. Molly was standing on her back porch tying her sunbonnet strings when we left. "I sure hate that," Gid said. I knew he would have to get over it in his own time, so I never said nothing. Nobody could talk Gid out of feeling bad. When something happened to get his mind off things a minute, he was all right, and along came one of Jameson Williams' kids to do it. He was running right down the road. "My God, ain't he running?" Gid said. "Take to the ditch, he don't see us. Get out of his way and let him go." But when he got even with us, the boy stopped right quick and went to crying. He stood there in the road crying, picking one foot and then the other out of the hot sand and cooling it against his trousers leg. "Nelson drowned in the horse trough," he said, "just now." We grabbed him and went. Judith was sitting in the porch rocker, rocking and crying and hugging the boy so tight he couldn't have breathed if he had been in perfect health. "Oh, St. Peter," she said, "he's drowned and gone." Gid jerked the kid away from her and turned him upside down, and I ran to the backyard and kicked the rain barrel over and got it around there. Me and Gid squeezed the boy over it till about half the horse trough ran out of his mouth, and finally he came to. Gid carried him back and gave him to Judith. She was still hysterical. I don't think she ever knew it was us that drained him. She might have thought it was St. Peter. Anyhow, we went on. "What a day," he said. When we got to the ranch, it was done too late to feed. I unloaded the 12 sacks of feed while Gid was trying to make up his mind what to do. "I don't never get nothing done anymore," he said. "These old pens need rebuilding, and that damn fencing ain't finished. Why does a man even try?" "I've often wondered," I said. "Well, you damn sure don't ever accomplish nothing if you don't try," he said. "Let's sit down in the shade here a minute." "Some people get rich without trying," I said. "Look at Pearl Twice. She used to go in the bushes with just about anybody, and now she drives around in a big Chrysler and sends her kids off to fancy schools." "Yeah, but that's just rich," he said. "That's just diamonds on a dog's ass." "Maybe so, but Pearl don't go in the bushes so cheap anymore." "Now I got to organize," he said, "before I go to the hospital. Wished I never had agreed to this damn operation. No telling how long it will tie me up. I thought it was just a standard operation for kidney trouble," I said, "like grinding your valves." "Oh, it is," he said, "but you never know. I'm pessimistic, I guess." "Well, don't worry about the ranch," I said. "I've taken care of it for 38 years. I won't lay down on the job now." "That's what worries me," he said. How well you've taken care of things. That's why nothing on this whole outfit works like it ought to. No, it's because you're too tight to buy good equipment, I said. Anyhow, he said, and be that as it may, I'm going to draw you up enough orders to last you till I get back. Glad to have them, I said. Then I'll at least know what not to do. He wet his pencil and went to figuring, and I whittled some. The big white thunderheads were bouncing along on the south wind like tumbleweeds, and the lot was a little dusty. I guess this will hold you for a while, he said, handing me 4 or 5 pages out of the little book. I wrote them down so you wouldn't forget any. Don't lose them. I gave them the once-over. The first thing I need to do is lose these here, I said. I ain't got no crew of Mexicans working for me. Just a few little chores, he said. I want to straighten one thing out, I said. When Mabel took you off on that boat trip, I had a little trouble with your brother-in-law, Willie. Now, if he shows up this time trying to tell me what to do, he's liable to get his feelings hurt. Willie was the state representative from our district and a fat-ass politician if there ever was one. Every year, he'd show up at the town baseball games passing out little old scrawny peaches. Once he offered me one. You ain't too old to vote, he said. I will be before I vote for you, I said. He shut up like I'd poured him full of alum. I never told you about him coming out, I said. I didn't see no sense in embarrassing you. Well, by God, I like that, he said. Willie trying to give you orders? Just trying to get me to quit, I said. Him and Mabel still think I'm a bad influence on you. That fat bastard, he said. It's no wonder to me he'd try something like that. It ain't to me neither, I said. I just wanted to tell you so you wouldn't be surprised if he shows up at the hospital to tell you how nasty I was to him. I wouldn't care if you drowned him, he said. Damn, I wish Mabel wouldn't scheme around like that. She's behind it. Seems like the older I get, the less I know for sure. Well, don't lose no sleep over Willie, I said. I just wanted to mention it. Just don't let him make you mad enough to quit, he said. He was so gloomy all of a sudden he was practically planning his own funeral. I like that, I said. We've been friends 65 years. You don't think a fat ass like Willie could run me off, do you? Of course not, he said. I'm sorry. We didn't say anything for a while. Molly takes her age pretty well, he said then, out of the blue. I'm half a notion to quit Mabel and go live with her yet. I might have a few years' peace. If I live over this operation, I might just do it. You don't need to tell nobody, though. Oh, I won't, I said, and he looked at me pretty close. Would that bother you much, he said, if I was to move in with Molly? I hadn't really thought about it from your angle. Why, it wouldn't bother me a bit, I said. I think it would be good for both of you. Besides serving Mabel and Willie right. The part about it not bothering me was a plain lie, and he knew it. I kept whittling on my stick and didn't look at him. I guess it would, though, he said, kind of sad. We've kind of split her, haven't we? Anyhow, it's just one of my crazy ideas. I doubt she'd want to do it anyway. We sat there an hour, watching it get dark, and didn't say another word. He sure was lonesome for Molly. I was, too. And neither one of us had the other fooled. Chapter 4. I was sure right about Willie coming. About a week after Gid went to the hospital, I was out one morning doctoring some puny calves, and I seen Gid's big Oldsmobile driving up to the lot. Willie got out and came toward me like I was the president. He was peeling off the glove on his handshaking hand. Put her there, Johnny, he said. By God, it's been some time. I got screwworm dope on my hands, I said. What can I do for you, Willie? Oh, not a thing, he said. I was just in town staying with Mabel while Gid's in such a bad way. I thought I'd run out and see if I could be any help. To tell the truth, I could use the exercise. Oh, I've seen worse overweight men than you, I said. 1 or 2. Actually, he was just a fat tub of lard. Well, whatever you need doing, just show me. I wasn't raised on a dryland farm for nothing. You wasn't, I said. I thought it was being raised on nothing on a dryland farm was what caused you to go into politics. Or was it because you couldn't raise nothing? I just came right out and got insulting when I talked to Willie. I didn't have no time to fool around. It's just like Mabel says, he said. You don't try to get along with people. I came all the way out here at my own expense to see if I could be of some help, and you insult my ancestry. Get off the goddamn soapbox, I said. There ain't no voters around. You know damn well whose expense you come out on, Gid's. It's just a pity he didn't throw away his car keys and cancel his charge accounts before he went in. Now you listen, McLeod, he said. My sister and I have had about enough of you. Listen yourself, I said. I've had a damn sight too much of you and your sister. Now you see this jar of screwworm dope? It's the blackest, shittiest smelling stuff they ever put in a bottle. Unless you want about half a bottle on the front of that white shirt of yours, you better get in that car and skedaddle. I started around the feed trough, holding my bottle ready to throw. I would have thrown, too, if he'd opened his mouth, but he never. That's one quick way to get rid of a politician. Only the next day I ran into him again, and he had me at a disadvantage. I had just stepped out of the domino hall. Well, I see you've been working hard today, he said, looking after my sister's interests. No, I've been playing dominoes all afternoon, I said, if it's any of your business. Mabel's business is my business, he said, and you're working partly for her, so I guess we ought to talk. My checks are signed Gideon Fry, I said. He's the one I work for. That's why we need to talk, he said. Of course, you haven't seen Gideon since the operation. If you had interest enough to go see him, you'd know he won't be in any shape to give orders for a long time. Hell, he don't have to be in very good shape to give orders, I said. Besides, I'm going to see him day after tomorrow. Well, he's a very sick man, he said. The doctors have told him he'll have to quit work completely. Now, what do you think of that? It don't surprise me, I said. They're always telling him something like that, but he ain't quit yet. And even if he had, I wouldn't take no orders from you or Mabel. You can take your orders and put them where the monkey put the peanut. And that ended conversation number 2. That one worried me just a little, though. On my way home that afternoon, I stopped by Molly's. She met me at the back gate. I was hoping you'd come by today, she said. I've been wanting to talk to you. You know, I talk a lot better when I'm full, I said. She grinned. We had black-eyed peas and turnip greens and beef for supper, and I had about half of a custard pie and the better part of a pot of coffee. I've got to get the weeds mowed around my barn, she said. I nearly stepped on a snake yesterday. One nearly stepped on me today, I said. He was a political snake. Willie Peters, she said. I was down to see Gid yesterday. I was hoping you'd been, I said. How was he? She looked a little worried, too. He was still a little dopey, she said. I never got to stay but about 10 minutes. Willie said they told him to quit work, I said. Oh, they told him that 10 years ago, she said. They just tell him that on general principles. One of the nurses told me they found some kind of little old tumor, but she didn't know if it was malignant or not. I think Mabel was in the building somewhere, what made them run me off so quick. I hated to leave. Well, I'll be down and see him tomorrow, I said. Maybe we'll get to talk a while. Let's go out on the porch. The chairs were done out there. We went out and sat down. It was dark, and we sat quite a while, enjoying the south breeze. The white clouds were rolling over, and the moon was done up. I wished old Gid could have been there with us. He would have enjoyed the cool. I could just barely see Molly, rocking in the dark. I reached out and patted her hand. Whatever become of that old glider, I said. Tonight would be a nice night to swing a little. Good Lord, she said, I gave it to some high school kids who come out hunting scrap iron. I wish I had it back. Want to ask you something, I said, just out of curiosity. Gid mentioned to me once that he was kind of thinking about leaving Mabel and moving out here with you. You all ever decide about it? Molly sighed and didn't say anything for a while. Oh, we've talked about it a lot, Johnny, she said, but we haven't decided. Gid hates to lose little Susie. Besides, I don't know. They may take him off to the Mayo Clinic now. I'll make a bet they don't do that, I said. Well, I just wish he'd come on out here where he'd have a little peace, she said. He's done without it all his life. I believe I could take better care of him than he's been getting. Well, I just wondered how you felt about it, I said. I guess it will come down to whether he likes me better than he does Susie, Molly said. He's got such a conscience, you know. You got to convince him something's right or he won't touch it. Or else you got to trick him some way. Why, hell, tricking him's twice the easiest, I said. I can trick him 9 times an hour, but I never have been able to convince him of nothing. We sat there watching the night till almost 10 o'clock. The whippoorwills were calling all over the ridge. Bedtime for me, I said. She walked to the pickup with me and told me to tell Gid hello for her. Glad you came by, she said. Come a little oftener. She was standing by the running board, and I reached out and patted her shoulder. When I drove off, I remembered a lot of the times when we was younger and I'd stayed the night. It wasn't that I wasn't welcome no more either. We were just different. Used to, we could chase around and have fun doing nearly anything. Now we both just got yawny. It seemed plain sad. Chapter 5. I had wonderful luck at the hospital. Mabel and Willie had already left for the day, and Gid hadn't had no sedative. He had his bed cranked up so he could see out the window and watch the traffic. I knew the minute I seen him he wasn't in no danger. "Country getting dry?" he asked. He was white as a bleached sheet, but he didn't seem weak. At least his voice wasn't. "Some," I said. "What do you mean, some?" he said. I could see he was primed for a long conversation. "Just some," I said. "A rain wouldn't do no harm, but then I've seen it a damn sight drier. We had a good shower down on the river country the day you went in." "Just an inch," Molly said, he said. "That's already burned up." "Now, just back up," I said. "You've been lying here half unconscious in an air-conditioned room for 10 days, and you're trying to tell me how hot and dry it is?" "I got eyes," he said. "I can see that lawn out there. They water it every day, and it's still dry." "How's the cattle?" he said. "They all died of blackleg, and a whirlwind blew the windmill over," I said. "How's that for calamity? When you coming home?" "Be out in 2 days," he said. "Don't tell nobody, though. They think they're going to keep me here 2 more weeks. Gid was a great one for walking out of hospitals. He'd done it 4 or 5 times in his life.